Welcome back everybody, it's the fantastic and lovable Texan Nathurow with another video. I've got some more real life lore, and this is going to be, I would say, a good video. Why would you ask? Well, it's about the one and only Texas. Come on. It's what if Texas was an independent country? So, in case any of you don't know, Texas, in fact, used to be an independent country for about 10 years. It was right after it got independence from Mexico, and then 10 years later, it became part of the United States. Now, I don't want to go too much into detail about Texas because I don't want to take away what this video might say about it, but this ought to be interesting. Let's jump in.
This video is done in a collaboration with Wisecrack, so make sure to check out their video next. So this is a very special video for me, because as I'm sure many of you already know, I live in Texas, and have lived here for nearly my entire life.
I did not know RealLifeLore was from Texas. That makes me like him even more. Rock on, brother. This is a special video for me too. So, we're not only getting a video about Texas, but we're getting an insider's perspective of what if Texas was an independent country today. So, ooh, yes, please.
So, naturally, I've always wondered what Texas would be like if it was actually its own independent country. It used to be one once for a quick point in history between 1836 and 1846 before it got annexed by the United States, but what would this independent Texas look like today if it ever happened? First of all, Texas basically gets second place in everything inside the US. It has the second largest population behind California, the second largest economy also behind California, and the second largest area behind Alaska. But that doesn't mean that Texas is small. The Texan population stands at 28,305,000 people, which would make it the 50th most populous country in the world.
So, before it goes more into details about Texas, current projections say that Texas is eventually going to surpass California in population. The reason for it being is because, as of right now, the cost of living in Texas is much lower than, say, the state of California. A lot of people are moving into Texas. I want to say Texas is the state that has the most people moving into it, more than any other state. Yeah, some people like it, and some people don't like it, but hey, it's happening, so I mean, it's just gonna get more popular, so here goes.
Ahead of a lot bigger countries like Australia. While Texas is much smaller than Australia in terms of land, it's much bigger than any country in Europe is except for Russia. Texas is so big on a European scale that you could fit all of Poland inside of it and still have room to drive around the edges. The town of Texarkana in the east is closer to Chicago, Illinois than to the city of El Paso on the western side of Texas. If it was independent, Texas would be the 39th largest country in the world in terms of land area. But the final big thing about Texas is its economy. The Texan economy stands currently at a GDP of 1.599 trillion US dollars. This is enormous and would make Texas the 11th largest economy in the world, beating out other giant countries like South Korea, Russia, and Australia again. Big companies like American Airlines, AT&T, Dell, and ExxonMobil all have headquarters currently located in Texas.
Yeah, very true. A lot of tech companies are moving to Texas as well, especially within the central area of Texas, like the Austin area and also the Dallas area, which is northeast of Texas. Also, outside of the tech industry, Texas also has its own self-sustaining power grid that pretty much runs throughout most of it, maybe except for the exception of like extreme far west Texas, like El Paso, and maybe the upper Panhandle. A quick reason for that being is once electricity started becoming mainstream, a lot of electric companies started opening up around Texas, but over time they started joining with one another and eventually formed just this like massive company. But anyway, he might actually cover it, so let's see. I might be jumping the gun.
Which dramatically adds to this economic power. Texas is probably one of the few US states that actually could succeed as an independent country, and here are a few reasons why. First, it has a coast, and therefore access to the world's shipping routes. Houston is the 8th busiest port in the United States and already has shipping routes connected with Brazil, the Netherlands, Germany, India, and China. Second, Texas is what's called a tax donor state, meaning that the Texan state government sends more money to the federal government than it receives back in benefits. For every $1 that Texas sends to Washington, it receives back just 94 cents. This means that Texas could fund all of their current government expenditures and still have enough left over to generate a nice budget surplus. Compared with other states like Mississippi, who gets $3 back from the federal government for every $1 they send, Texas would be in a great financial situation at first upon becoming independent. The final reason Texas would be self-sustainable is energy. Let's switch over to a map of the U.S. electrical grid to see how that's the case. There are only 3 main power grids in the mainland United States that the U.S. operates: the Western grid, the Eastern grid, and the Texan grid. Texas has its own fully independent electrical grid that wouldn't be influenced by the rest of the U.S.
So, there is the map. Yep, pretty much how I said. You see how the western tip isn't inside the green area, also the upper panhandle area. What I didn't know is that there was some sections to the east that aren't a part of it, in the upper northeast and the lower southeast. Huh. Yeah, it's important to remember that every state has its autonomy. You know, every state has its own constitution, and Texas in particular is one of those states that, hey, if we can do things that allow us to not rely on the federal government as much, we're gonna do it. Texas has always tried to make itself as independent as possible. The thing is, though, it can secede after what happened with the Civil War, but it can break up into smaller states if enough people supported it. But hey, he might talk about that too, so let's see.
If another state like, say, New Mexico decided to leave, the rest of the US could just shut off that part of the grid and deny them electrical access. Not so with Texas. But here's the really interesting part. Back in 1840, Texas used to be a lot bigger. Back then, it claimed about half of modern New Mexico, and also chunks of Oklahoma, Kansas, Colorado, and even as far north as Wyoming. If for some reason the modern Texas was expanded back to this territory today, it wouldn't really add as much as you think. The population would only go up by a little over 1.2 million people, because besides the towns of Santa Fe in New Mexico and Pueblo in Colorado, most of this extra land is pretty rural. But back in 1840, the entirety of Texas was even more rural. Back then, the entire population of Texas was an incredible 70,000 people, basically the size of a small suburb of either Dallas or Houston is today. The only settlements you can see on maps from back then were San Antonio, Houston, and Santa Fe, which were all basically islands of people separated by hundreds or thousands of kilometers of open and unpopulated land. Texas has changed dramatically since then in just a little over 1.5 centuries, from a rural backwater on the fringes of the world to an economic powerhouse home to tens of millions. But there's one more thing that we haven't touched on yet, and that's if Texas could actually legally do this. The answer is a definitive no.
Yeah,
the US government has made it explicitly clear that no states can ever leave the Union, since the last time that was tried didn't really go over so well. This includes Texas, who can never ever hope to compete with the US military. Texas does have a pretty weird clause though in its constitution that allows the state to at any time divide itself into 5 different smaller states.
I guess I did get a little too excited watching this video about Texas and kind of jumped the gun on some information. Of course he's going to bring all this up. Yeah, this is all very Texan-y knowledge. Texan-y, Texas-ish knowledge. But yeah, you get my point. Although I seriously doubt that Texas would break up. I mean, everything from the shape of the state to its flag to the culture, you know, the food, like, it's just left a very impressionable mark on the country, and I seriously doubt the people within it would want to ruin that, so to speak. So yeah, that's what I think. Anyway, let's keep going.
Texas doesn't need permission from the US Congress to do this, and it would immediately quintuple their own power in the US Senate from having 2 senators up to 10 senators. This could enable Texas to influence the US government more heavily, but likely wouldn't help it to achieve independence. The vast majority of people living inside of Texas don't want independence anyway, but it's always just fun to speculate. The secession of Texas is just one of the many themes of one of my all-time favorite games, Deus Ex. It's about a grim future where humans can be technologically enhanced and where every conspiracy theory is more or less true. My friends over at Wisecrack just released a video exploring the philosophy of the whole series, which explores how paranoia and chaos operate in society and whether or not we should all be excited about becoming cyborgs. So check it out by clicking here and tell them that RealLifeLore sent you. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next Friday for another brand new video then.
Great video. Sorry about jumping the gun on some of that information that he eventually mentioned himself, but I know if he hadn't mentioned some of that stuff, I would have been like, what? How could you not have brought up this? And so I guess that's probably why I wanted to say it. But yeah, he did a good job at explaining like the more popular points of Texas. I mean, there's a whole bunch of other little facts about Texas, you know, like how Dr. Pepper came from here, and that we have the fastest speed limit in the country, which is 85 miles an hour. It's a highway from San Antonio to Austin. I know all the Germans watching this are laughing at that because you guys got no speed limit on most of your Autobahn. Yeah. Rub it in, why don't you? But hey, at least our state's got the fastest road, you know, so it's something. Anyway, that's all the time I have for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. And as always, I will see you all in the next video. Peace out, guys.